13 years now, and I've been working with Cherwell for about the last 5 or 6 years. And so we're going to talk about tips and tricks today and things that we can do to make our Cherwell systems a little bit easier to use, better, faster. And if there are any questions, please do not hesitate to stop me along the way, and we will talk through those. Some of these things will be actually showing live in an environment after I've gone through them, but you'll be walking through and you will see the PowerPoint that supports all of these items that we're talking about today. So the first thing, I have a question. I need to autofill a value based on the change in more than one field. Some people may have want to trigger whether or not a category or a subcategory changes, or maybe a team or a incident subcategory. When something changes, I want to change a third value. And if anybody has ever worked with the auto-populate, you know that an auto-populate works off of a change in a single value, not more than one. So how do I fix this problem? Well, our solution, we have several steps. So the first thing you can do is you can create a new field that is going to hold a relation of the fields, and that needs to be the size of all of the fields that you want to auto trigger off of. So if your fields are 50 characters each and you have 3 fields that you're working off of, then your resulting trigger field would have to be 150. And number 2, on the field that you want to auto-populate from, you trigger the auto-populate to that new field that you created. So you can then fill it as needed. I mean, like maybe from an expression, because maybe the data doesn't come from those 2 fields, but maybe it comes through a relationship or comes from something else. The result is that you can do that. You can fill it then from any change in any of those fields. Order does matter, and I'm going to show you this in a minute. Make sure that field is lower in the field definitions than your other fields. And here you're seeing an example of, those 3 fields. If a change is made to any one of those 3, I'm just going to put a last change date in. So let me go ahead over to our system. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a blueprint. Here's another little tip that's not in my presentation, but when you pull up your field list, your fields are in the order that they are created. And this is the native order. This is the order when I'm talking about ordering. This is what I mean, in this order. So you'll notice that my field, my temporary holding field, is after my 3 lookup table fields. If it were not, I don't know if you know this, but I can move there's a little up and down arrow in the bottom right-hand corner. I can move my fields up and down. So if it weren't far enough up or down, I can actually move it accordingly. And this changes the order that they were created in. I mean, well, so, you can actually demote a field further down the list. And obviously then if you click on the name, you're going to actually sort by alphabetical and sort by reverse alphabetical. And then the third click will always take you back to that native ordering. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into my demo table here. So here I have a thing for my lookup table. So I have field A, B, and C. So if I change field A, you'll notice that that time changed. If I change field B and or field C, you'll notice that that time is changing no matter which one of those fields I update. That's a pretty cool little trick. We've used that for a number of customers, and you'll know that you have the problem when you find it. It's hard for me to say exactly one single thing. Does anyone have a question or any applicability where they might use that? Okay, we'll come back over here. And Not sure how I got off. Okay. The next thing is, this is a did you know. Most people probably know this, but newer Cherwell customers may not. There's a remove unused user accounts, and that will clean up user accounts that have been disabled, but possibly not completely removed. A lot of times you may come with a question, well, this user hasn't been here for a while, but like, I mean, it's disabled, but we're able to log in or something like that. That's because there's a disconnect between the list of customers that are actually in your table versus the list of customers that have been created. These fields, these accounts get set as unused, but they don't get actually removed from the table until such time as you use this remove unused user accounts. So you may see a little bit of a disconnect between your two sources of information. The other item that is on that screen is also the synchronize your team info business objects with a team list. Originally, Cherwell provided just the team list that was inside the administrative. Later on, in I think version 7, they actually added a team info business object. And when they did, there are some situations where your team info table, your team info business object, may not be in sync completely with the teams that are defined in the administrator. So when that happens, it's very easy. You just come out here to your database and system maintenance, click the synchronize team info business objects, and click OK. And then that will actually refresh and build those two lists. The next thing, I have a problem. I have too many specifics fields. What can I do with this? Well, the business case in this is that SQL Server tables permit a maximum of 1,024 fields in a single table. And I've succeeded that capacity, or I'm getting very close to exceeding that capacity on my specifics. Specifics, for some people who may or may not know, are group members. So each one of the fields, all of the fields for all of the specifics members count towards that total. And there are a lot of clever tricks that you can use to help minimize or work with that number. Let's look at a couple. Number one, for solution number one, there's a lot of valid reasons to utilize checkboxes on your specific. For example, I have a list of a lot of different locations that I have, or I have a listing of a lot of different options, maybe for I'm purchasing a computer, or I'm working through some sort of a debugging type of thing. Those logicals, even though they don't take up a lot of room in the number of characters they store, they take up a lot of useless space. So there are ways that we can manage some of that, especially when a lot of logicals fit into a specific category, such as my locations that I have. In some cases, I may have in excess of 24 or 40 locations. Well, I can define all of those, and what I do is I make sure that they are not stored in the database. That seems a little backwards because, you know, in order to pull data out, you need to have things stored in the database. However, stay with me. Next, we're going to add a long text field. And this text field is calculated and stores a name that identifies each one of these logicals when that checkbox is true. So if check 1 is selected, then I'm going to store the word check 1. If check 2 is selected, I'm going to store check 3. Check 2, and check 3, check 4, etc., all the way out to the end of my check 10. And then what I'm going to do on each one of those logicals, like check 1, I'm going to have a calculated value for it. And it is going to look at this name here, this field that I calculated, and if that field is like %, check 1, %, and you'll notice there's a little like a semicolon there as well. That will actually then automatically check my logical. So how does this work?
And Kim, we do have a few questions coming in, so when it's a good point to take a break in the next few minutes, let me know and I'll read you some of those questions.
I sure will. So I can certainly go ahead and check off my boxes, and I save. And for example, normally if I were to refresh and this were not a calculated field, my checks would disappear, but they didn't because they're recalculating back from that original field. And I can go back in, and Laura, I'll get to those questions in just a second.
No problem.
So if we go look at check 1, you can see if the demo check 1 equals true, meaning that logical was checked, I'm going to store the word check 1. Otherwise, I'm going to store empty for that field. And so I'm not going to take up a lot of extra space. I'm just going to store the values that are part of this, which ones are selected. And then on the other side, on check 1, you can see, just like I showed you, is that if that field is like percent check 1 semicolon percent. Now, why did I choose to put that semicolon in there? I did that for uniqueness, because if I had just said if it's like check 1, that would have worked just fine, except that if I had checks 10 through 19, it was going to match 10 through 19. So that's why I went through that extra step to put in that percent sign, or the semicolon, so that I could separate those values out and each one would be unique. All right, Laura, I'll take the first question.
Okay, so those questions have come in over the past few minutes. The first one that came in was, are we talking about users or customers?
For the unused user accounts?
I'm not sure. It came in about 3 or 4 minutes ago. If you want to ask any or if the person who asked the question would like to put some clarifying information in, that could be very helpful. It looks like yes.
And I would say yes. It's for the customers. A lot of times, well, I think actually it works on both. The customers, like you may have deleted some customers, or you may have restored and reactivated customer data. And so what happens is you get these, the customers that are unlinked. The system thinks that there is an account there, but there isn't, because maybe that account has been refreshed. And so you need to do that synchronization process. And that's for that customer data.
Okay. I don't see any follow-on to that one yet. Anyway, the next question I have, does the remove user accounts affect the user BO or the customer BO?
It doesn't affect either. It affects information that is stored in system tables inside Cherwell. So it is not removing any data from your table specifically. It's removing data from tables that you don't have access to.
Okay. Next question, how will this impact tickets that are still assigned, open, or resolved to users that you remove? And there's a follow-on. This question is specific to cleaning up the user accounts.
It doesn't. And the reason why, all it is doing is preventing an issue where you may have someone who, maybe you're trying to create a login, and the login says, well, I already have a login for this person, but you're like, well, I don't, because the login doesn't exist. Maybe you've created your customer accounts, you created all of your portal IDs so that the customers could log in, and then you went ahead and deleted all of your customer data and reestablished your customer data. You could be getting into a situation at some point where you are trying to create a user account and you can't, because it thinks that it's already there and it's not. And so this is really just cleaning up data that you can't see. It has nothing to do with any data that is on any ticket or any data that is stored in any business object. It is solely, completely an internal thing.
Okay, I have a follow-on comment from the person who put this question in. She says, we use LDAP to populate our customers. We are interested in cleaning up, quote, user accounts.
The user accounts, this is not going to remove any credentials that are currently out there for anyone. There is, this is solely to remove account. I'd like to. I mean, we can always talk to that person later offline, but this option is solely to remove unused user accounts, meaning an account was created, it is no longer attached to its original record, and it is basically kind of standing in the way so that you actually can't create like another or hook up another record with the same name, because it's in. So you would absolutely know when you get to that. I can't hook this up, and this is the person. Why can't I create that? And so that's when you would use this option.
Okay, it sounds like she got the information that she needs, so perfect.
Okay.
Let's jump down to the next one. Can the synchronization be automated or scheduled?
That is a fabulous question. I don't think the remove unused business or user accounts can be, but I do believe one of those options I believe can be. And so we're going to go right into the schedule. And we're going to go to the action, and there's your database maintenance, and both of those can be done there. So you can schedule it like once a week to remove unused user accounts and synchronize your team info list. You could actually schedule both of those at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Is the 1024 for all specifics or just one specific object?
That's a great question as well. My wording was a little awkward on my screen, my slide there. If we go look, hold on a second, let me get to that screen. So specifics are group members, and I said, so every specifics member that you have shares a real estate of 1024. So the specifics group leader knows about all of those fields have been defined on every specific, even if the group leader doesn't have access to it. If you haven't exposed it to the group leader is still the owner of all of those fields. And so that 1024 limit is across all of your specifics. And the way we can talk about this is if I'm looking at let me go in here. I'm going to go into an incident. Sorry, my system is seeming to be a little slow here. So when I do an update step in my one step, and let's say I want to update a field in my specifics. If I go look at all of my specifics fields, I see every field defined to any specific, not just the group leader or not just specifics A or specifics B. I see every field for every single one of the specifics. And by the way, the name that is displayed here will be the name from the earliest occurrence of that specific. So if you want a specific name, pardon the pun there, if you want a certain name to show, here in this list, it would have to be the name that is defined to the earliest specific that occurs. But this is a list of all of every field that is defined at any level to any one of your specifics. So that 1024 limit is across all specifics, which is why we're always so careful to tell you to manage your specifics very carefully. And we're going to get to a couple other things about that in here in just a moment. Is there another question, Laura, before I continue?
Yes, and there's actually a series of them, so I'm going to try to string them together in a way that makes sense. So I'll read you the first 4 comments that I think all go together. If you already have a ton of logical fields but want to convert this process, do you just delete the old fields to create more space in the database?
No. Okay. There actually, that's an excellent question, and there's a process for that. If you want to take existing data, especially as existing production data, the first thing you would do is you would create this step. You would just skip over this step for the moment. You're going to do this, but later on. You're going to add your text field first. And now you're going to make sure that that field is calculated, and you're going to go through this exact same process for all of those fields that currently exist with data. Because you don't want to lose your data. You may have valuable data and you don't want to lose it. So you want to go through this step and add this calculation and add all of those things in. Remember that long text field that does those calculations should probably be at the end of those check boxes or those logicals. So I would put the text calculated field down towards the end of my fields. Then I would go through and do the calculated. So then I would make the check mark, the logical, auto check automatically when that data is in this list. And after I'm confirmed and I'm happy with all of that, I would first remove like maybe 1 or 2 of these, check to make sure that my data is still coming up okay. And then I could go through and remove the rest of them and validate that when those items are checked, that they are getting checked properly and the data is getting into here properly. And then you can go and publish that into production. But you don't want to remove and make it not stored in database until the very end. So you would do steps 1, step 2, and then this would become your new step 3.
Okay, so the follow-on comments, maybe you already addressed them, but I'm going to read them off anyway. It says, this is a great process to start out with, but what if you're already in this situation? But I like this process for logical fields. Maybe I missed it, but why a like and not an equals?
Well, the reason why it's a like, and you're right, it is a great process, and it is a process that will be very usable across a lot of different things. But the reason why it's a like is because you can't say whether it's equal, because this text field is not going to be equal to check 1. It is going to be possibly check 1, semicolon, check. If all 10 of these are checked, it's going to be check 1, semicolon, check 2, semicolon, check 3, semicolon, check 4. So if I actually only said equals, it would not be equal to anything. And so I have to say like, and I have to put my percent signs around that, because that's how I search a text field for some instance of text that I'm looking for, is I say my text field is like the text that I'm searching within the percent signs. So that's any data in front of my check, any data, my data that identifies my check mark, and then any data after my check is the other part of that.
Okay, great. We had 2 other comments by this person, and I believe he was answering the question that we addressed about the user accounts. The comment was, we created automated processes based on the status of the customer table and will update or remove the user info record. There's a relationship between customer internal and user info that we use. Does that make sense? I believe that was answering the previous question.
It does. This process, remove unused user accounts, has nothing to do, and by the way, that is a great Cherwell trick as well. I've deployed that in a number of instances where Cherwell does not provide an automatic linkage between your users and your customers, but what you can do is you can actually create that relationship yourself and create a relationship from user to customer. The remove unused user accounts does not physically remove any data from your tables. It is removing something from back-end tables that you do not physically have access to remove on your own. So that utility is simply doing something that you would not normally otherwise have access to.
Great, thank you. So we've got a few other questions before we move on. The next question I have is, how do you see how many total fields you're currently using?
That is a great question, and I don't have a answer for it, but I will get you an answer. Obviously, the worst case scenario is you count. And I typically, there is a way through SQL Server to actually get you the number of fields, but I don't know the actual command for that off the top of my head, so I will have to get that to you after the meeting.
Okay, and I'll make a note to follow up with that person with that information.
Great.
Next question, how do you differentiate from an incident to a request?
And I'm not sure, is this specific to what we're talking about here, or is this specific to something else?
I've got a follow-on comment. He said a bit more info. Service is for service portfolio. Category is for the category of the service, and sub should be the service.
Well, in Cherwell, and I'm not sure if this is a newer customer or not, but in Cherwell, they have the incident subcategory. Incident subcategory is, toward the bottom. So you select your service, you select your category, and then you select your subcategory. And if we go and look at the incident subcategory table, I'll just pick anything here. Here we're looking at account management. Account management is the service, so that is a service that is designated to creating and managing the accounts within your system. Network access is the type of account, so it's a network access account. And so what I'm doing is I'm removing access permissions. So I've just identified all three of those levels. Whenever you have this service, this category, and this subcategory, this is going to be a service request. And if it were something else, if it were like I have an issue or something like that, let's see, submit incident here. Anytime I have this computer desktop management computer submit incident, that's going to be an incident. So each one of the entries in the subcategory table are going to identify whether or not it is an incident or a service request.
Okay, I don't see yet. Okay, this person says, I see what you're saying, but does not answer my question. If you would like to put a follow-on question, feel free to ask whatever else you'd like to ask, or we can schedule a follow-up conversation with you after and dig into a little bit further.
And I think that would be great, Laura. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and do that? I will flag you for some follow-up conversation and we can dig into it.
Okay. So if we continue.
I have a couple more questions.
Okay.
They'll actually it looks like just one final question. This customer says, we're SaaS. Does it matter if we clean up our unused user accounts ourselves in production at any time as a part of periodic system maintenance? Is there any risk, and can you roll back?
There is no risk, and there is no rollback, but it's not going to remove anything that is currently active. It is only removing, if you've ever had a broken link where you've clicked on a URL but it didn't go anywhere because something in that got corrupted or was wrong, it identifies it because there is no link between the account that was created and the customer or the user that it belongs to. So it's truly just saying, I have a broken link, I'm going to go ahead and remove that and clean it up. So it's not removing anything that is currently active, it is only removing things that are no longer active. And that's why it says remove unused user accounts.
All right, we are safe to move on.
Okay, well now there's a solution. We're still on the 1024 of the specifics. We have a couple more solutions. Number 2, you can reuse fields. A lot of people do not know this. The first thing is I reuse a field. When I'm coming in to look at a specific, I look at if there is any field that is remotely identifiable as what I need. So that's my first option. And I can always reuse that and change the name and change some of the criteria. So let's assume that I named my field generic 1, and it was like a 25 character field. I can actually have different rules and different validations between that. And so that same generic field, it can have label 1 on form 1, and it could have label 2 on form 2. So you can actually, to do that, here's how you would do it. You would, from the business object screen, you would select add fields from group and you would add your field. So it's going to add it with the criteria that was defined on the first iteration of it. And then what you can do is you can edit the field. You want to copy this internal name here, and then you want to go ahead and change your label, your name, to anything you want. And then you want to go back and paste in your original name back into the internal name. Let me show you exactly what I mean. So if we come into a blueprint, actually I'm not in specifics. Let me go to specifics. So I'm going to add a new field to network printer access. So the first thing I do is I come over here to the left-hand side and I look for add field from group. This is going to show me all of the other fields that have been defined and all of the other specifics. So let's say I want this accessory cost. Don't know why, I do. So it comes in, but I don't want it to say accessory cost. I want it to say maybe router cost. So I'm going to edit the field. And you'll notice here it has a name of accessory cost 2. I'm going to copy that. Notice I took my cursor off of that. Now I'm going to type into the name field. If I publish right now, it is going to change the name from accessory cost to router cost everywhere. Well, that might not be exactly what I wanted. So if I come down here and then I can go ahead and paste that original name in, it now is going to have a label of router cost with an internal name of accessory cost. So that's a way of me changing the label on a different specifics. Now, when I brought the specifics in, when I brought this field in, it didn't have any calculated values. It doesn't have any, it does have an auto-populate though, which you'll notice it didn't have because the criteria is not available for it. So I'm going to first of all remove that auto-populate, and maybe I want to validate it from a list. In my case, I'm going to validate it from a list. So I'm going to say oh, that's why, it's numbers. And then I put in, so 2 additional numbers. Maybe that's, for whatever reason, it needs to be validated from that number. And I happen to know where this is coming from in the other one. So you'll notice I just validated it. If I go back to my list, I'm pretty sure think this might be the one. No. Well, of course, I picked one that I don't know where it belongs. We knew. Okay, here we go. So if I come over here, here's accessory cost. And you'll notice here it was actually named to computer accessory cost. Oh, no, I guess this is a different field. I thought it was the same one. But in any event, it would actually have its own name here. Let me go ahead and repeat this process with computer accessory cost. I'll go and add that to our computer accessory cost. Now, like the other one, it came in that was auto-filled. So that autofill is not going to be available because those fields aren't available. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And I'm going to validate this from, you can have the $99 option or the $129 option.
I do have a couple questions, so let me know when it's a good time to take those.
Sure. Okay, so as you can see, I validated it here in my network printer access. If I come back to my employee new, and I pull up that same specifics or the same field, you'll notice that it is not validated from that, oops, wrong. You'll notice that it has no validation because I didn't give it one here. The fact is that I can have different rules for those fields from one member name to a second member name. Okay, Laura, I'm ready.
Okay, we have 3 questions. The first question is, could I just create a global specifics field called 50 character text and then customize it in each of my specifics?
You can. There's a small cost to defining something at the global level. And I can kind of show you what happens there. Here, and so I'm going to go ahead into my specifics group, and I'm going to take a field and I'm going to add it from the group, and I'm going to say assign CIs. I've added it to the group. By adding it to the group, it is now available in every single specifics of my group, which is fine if it's going to be something that is globally used. If it's only used on 3 out of 100 specifics, do you want to have that there and displayed for everyone, or do you just want it available for those 3 specifics? That is a great question, and you certainly can do exactly what I just did and escalate it to the group level, which I do for fields that have, I would say if I have like over 70% usage. So in other words, like if the field is used on, more than 60 to 70% of the specifics, I'll go ahead and add it to the group leader, because then I want the group leader to be able to manage that. So I want it to always be available. I want it to, so I want those business rules. I want to be able to follow, have it always be the same field. So in other words, like if I have a field for computer name or username, I don't want to have 5 different usernames created on specifics 1, specifics 2 through 5. I only want to have username and have it once.
Okay, I have a follow-on question by the person who asked this one. It's, could I add multiple instances of my global field to my unique specific?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Oh, the screen moved there. Could I add multiple instances of my global field to my unique specific?
No. If I understand the question, if I've escalated a field to the group leader level, or if I'm bringing like add field from group, like if I understand the question right, they wanted to possibly bring in access list 5 times. Access list is a field that is stored on SQL. And so it has a unique, it is a storage location. It's basically, think of it as a closet or a drawer. And so when I add that field to my specific, that can only contain the data that I'm giving it. Once I've used up that location, I have to go to a different location. So I wouldn't be able to reuse that same field, 7 times. That's why I would need like generic, if I were doing generic fields, I would need generic 1, generic 2, generic 3, generic 4, and generic 5.
Okay, it looks like he is satisfied with the answer, so thank you.
Great.
The next one that came in, let's say this renamed field is required. Will the system generate a message saying the field is required based on the name, quote, new name, or database name?
That is a fabulous, go ahead.
And a follow-on to that, also, what name will display for searching, one steps, etc.?
Those are both fabulous questions. Kudos to the person who asked. That's one of the reasons why that's one of the reasons why I went through the effort to rename, and I made it say router cost. Because if it is required, it's not going to say accessory cost 2, it's going to say router cost. And so that is one of the reasons that we rename. Now, for the other thing about searching, that's where you want to have a pretty good name for your field up in the front. So in other words, I want to say that what it's used for. Like maybe it's locations, or maybe it's like cost. Maybe I want to more have the generic version of it be a little bit more, generic or universal. That this is whatever that cost is, cost of item or something like that. And so when you're in the network, it's the router cost. When you're in the computer, it's the computer cost. So I would probably stick with more of a generic name when I'm defining that at that highest level. And by the way, remember what I said about the highest level, the first specific that it occurs in? You can actually control that. Like, let's say if I go ahead and I create a new specifics member, I could always create something that is a specifics that's not used for anything. I don't use that to display any forms, or I don't use that for any purpose other than to, add my fields. So I know that the fields that I needed were like accessory. It actually changed the name of it to router cost because router cost was the highest in the list. So I want to add router cost, and I want to add that computer cost. Computer accessory cost. So any of those fields that I want to control that generic name on, I can go ahead and add to this, basically the control specific. I still would have to have an empty form. So in other words, I could go through and just, what I do a lot of times in this is I'll go through and create a form wizard. I'll delete all the forms, delete all the fields, and just add a label and say, intentionally left blank. That way, if anybody gets there, they know that they weren't supposed to have gotten there. So
okay,
there's nothing
Kim,
that they can do. Go ahead.
Someone's actually commented on some code for you. He's saying limp Kim know the SQL command to get the count of the column fields. And then there's some code provided there.
Oh, great.
I don't know if that's
Okay.
something you want to share on your screen or something we should email out to the group.
How do I get to that, Laura?
If you click on the questions pane, if you see that there, you should see it at the very end of all the questions.
On the questions pane. Please tell me where the questions pane is.
Do you see the panes on the right side of your screen? If not, find the orange button with a white arrow.
I do. Yep, I have the orange button.
Okay.
Oh,
click it.
here, wait a minute. Let me see if this. No, sharing audio, webcam. I'm not sure I see the. Laura, can you send that to me? And oh, never mind. You just did.
I read your mind.
You read my mind. Yes. And thank you to the person who actually looked it up for me.
Yes, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
So I will actually add this to the presentation, but that's how you determine how many columns that you have in your table. Okay, Laura, I'll continue.
Okay, let me get back up to the top of our questions list here. Give me just a moment. I got a couple more questions before we move on. Next one is, when the customer searches for the data in their specific field by name, do they use the internal name, which may be unrecognizable? Oh, shoot, it jumped up again here. Or the name assigned to it?
They would have to use the name where it is defined at the highest level, which is why you'll notice, like I said, I add this control sometimes to some of those so that I actually can control that name. And so you'll notice that control now shows up above any of the other specifics, but it's not one that is actually usable. It's not one that's used in any of the processes, but it's really just there for me to change the name to something that's more generic so that I can control what that field name is. So by changing it to cost, instead of it showing router cost, see here it shows cost on this specific. And then if I go and look at the network device, network services, it's actually going to show, no, it must have been, did I pick the right one? Network printer access, I'm sorry. And here it shows router cost. If I now go and I add it to another specific, it should now show me under the word cost, which it does. It's right there. So,
hey, Kim, can you post the SQL statement for the counting fields so we can copy it? I also think that's something, to answer another question, we're recording this presentation, so you'll get a recording of the video. We can also include the PowerPoint presentation, and perhaps that SQL statement is something that we can put into the PowerPoint presentation to share with everyone. If not in the PowerPoint, we can certainly put it in the body of the follow-up email. So you will get recorded links from us. It may take a few business days. We have to convert the recording and upload it to our website. So if we do run over the top of the hour and you're not able to stay with us, you'll get a recording to hear at the end of the presentation as well.
And Laura, I will go ahead and add that to the presentation. Okay. I don't have any way of sending that out to everyone from my side. I don't have all those options.
I'll be able to do that. Yep, I'll be able to do that to everyone. And a related question is, can I run SQL statements if I'm hosted? And if so, how?
You cannot, because what you can do is you can, and you may already have done this, you may take a copy of your hosted system and run it locally as a development copy. And when you run it on a development copy, you may be using like SQL Express or whatever you're using. And you would be able to then go into your SQL tools and run it there, run that SQL statement there. Like if you have Toad or if you have any other SQL Server management software, whatever you happen to have. And so to continue, I have just another solution. Well, I just have a couple more things about the specifics.
Okay, I did have a couple more questions that came in,
So
or
go right
possibly
ahead.
just one more. This was content specific, so I'm hoping you'll be able to figure out where it came from. Wouldn't this be confusing for entering them into a grid for a search? And yes, I know you can right-click on the field to find the name. Can you think of that in the context of where it would have been about 10 minutes ago?
Well, if I understand correctly, it's possible that they're talking about like these logicals. Well, what's great about that is that Cherwell provides you with some great tools. Number one, when I'm searching, this will make more sense if I actually go into a search. Let's say I'm searching incident management, and maybe incident management has a bunch of checkboxes, and I've done it this way. I can say any field. So I can look at, hey, are any of my fields equal to, check 1, which could have been school location 5, or it could have been bank location 1, or it could have been whatever your location happens to be. But I can search any field for that value that's in that text. I can also then look at and I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong, let's just say that this was my other field that was storing all of those values. I can say, does my short description hold that check 1? So I can say percent check 1%. And so I can do that as well. So instead of searching for checkboxes, I'm searching for the actual values that are stored inside that area. That might be New York. I mean, maybe my location is called New York, or maybe my location is called DC or Virginia or something like that. Then I can go ahead and just search on those values that represent those locations.
Okay, great. And I had a comment to answer the previous question about accessing the data hosted. Someone mentioned just submit a request to support and they will do it for you. So that could be a nice, easy trick as well.
Great.
We have cleared the questions. Let's move on.
Okay, fantastic. So the next step that I had here is I have a couple other things about solutions on the specifics. This sometimes gets to be a big thing because people don't realize that they're running out until they've already run out or they've gotten very close to running out. So one thing I can tell you from the very beginning, and it's also good later on in the process to go back and review, but always analyze your fields when you're creating something and see if a new field is warranted or if there is something else that can be used in its place. And the second step goes along with the first is reuse. If a field is used in many specifics, and like I said, maybe even make it 50% or more, then escalate it to the group leader. When you're looking at the number of times that these things have occurred, you will know, oh my God, I've run across this field 50 times. I'm going to go ahead and make it a group leader item. There's another trick that you can do, which I did not go into in this presentation, but you can create a new table to divide your specifics. So let's say everything has its own unique specific. All my incidents have their own specific, all my requests have their own specific, and I've even been using specifics for change, and I've got specifics everywhere. Well, you could actually subdivide. So for my incident specifics, I could organize my incident specifics into an incident specifics table. I can organize my request specifics into a request specifics table. And I could organize then those change ones into a change specifics table. Thereby, each one of them may have some more common ground between them that, because a change specific, maybe it has some things that will never be utilized in an incident. Or maybe some of those request ones are the ones that utilize all the checkboxes, and they want like every location under the sun. And this will enable you to do that and make more ground with, make more availability with little ground. And then this, remember, actually goes right along with a question that I answered a little while ago, and that is that fields defined to the group leader are automatically inherited into the group members. So anytime I put a field out there, it will automatically be created in every single one of my specifics. So you'll notice that here, that one that I put into the group leader, every single one of these specifics has been marked off as being changed. And if I go look, the computer cost is not there, but it should be. I'm not sure why it's not showing. Maybe it doesn't show up until I've published, but it marked it off as being changed. I'm not sure why it didn't show up there. Okay, that's the one it was defined to. Let's go look at another one here. I'm not seeing it, but I'm wondering if it's not going to show up until after it's been created, or after it's been published, and I didn't publish. But it did, anytime I add something to the group leader, it will go ahead and change each one of the group members as well. And so that's why you'll notice that each one of these guys got updated along the way.
We have a comment from a few minutes ago from someone who says, we actually created another 1024 columns by creating specifics too.
Which goes along with my suggestion as far as creating second specifics.
Perfect.
Except the only difference is that what they did is they didn't divide their things logically. They just extended. So they went and extended it. It created a new table instead of dividing, creating a new table to extend.
I just got another comment. Someone who said, I don't believe you clicked to OK to confirm the change, so cost never got added to the group leader.
Okay. Did I say no? I may have. I did, but I may have not have marked off there. You're absolutely right. That's probably what happened there, and we could go and confirm that.
Okay.
So if I come in here, I come into the group. And it's right there. Thank you. Someone's paying attention.
Okay. Very good.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to continue on here. The next thing I had is, this is a little tip. Make a system administrator dashboard. And so oftentimes you need access to certain information, and you don't want to have to go in there and create a blueprint every time you want to change something. So for example, when you're moving your system back from production to development, instead of every time I bring it back, then creating a new blueprint to set it back to dev, just put it on your dashboard. So if we go over here and look at our whoops. If we go and look at our dashboard, we can actually set the current system equal to whatever we want. So maybe I have a QA system, so I can actually change that to QA. And now the system thinks that it's QA. If I want to change it to production, it now thinks it's production. And you'll notice that it also updated the default recipient along the way. So if I change it back to Dev, it tells me who my default recipient is. And so maybe like that person has moved on and is no longer there anymore, I can actually change that test recipient for all those tickets. And boom, immediately now those tickets will start to go out to that other person. That's a lot faster and a lot easier than running a blueprint every time you want to change one of those things. And I have some other things here just for illustration purposes of things, like you can actually see the SLA settings, you can see your BOMGAR settings, you can see incident customer settings like your default customer. You could actually identify other things too that you want in here to change. This is all just an example and a setup. That's just a neat little trick. So now we have a did you know, and this is people who have been using Cherwell Service Management longer than version 7. They may not know this, that now you can actually validate and auto-populate straight from your list of the specifics members straight from your validation. So in my validation, so for example, on my specifics name, I click on other validation types, and then a valid business object name, I'd use members of a group and specifics. And then on the specifics ID, which is going to have that 42 character identifier, I click on auto-populate anytime my specifics name changes. And then I'm going to click on the little thing down here that has business object ID. In versions prior to version 7 that were initially distributed, they used the populate using group map. A lot of customers have changed that to either populate from a manual list, like if you happen to be hosted, or we would create something called a loopback connection that would enable me to create a view of all of those names and be able to get at them that way. This eliminates all of that by just allowing you to just validate and auto-populate straight from the business object. So the next thing I have is that I want access to my security group. Cherwell does not store the security group in the user info object. And by the way, I'm not going to show this because I was setting this up right before. I will have this working so I can actually show it after, but I was setting this up directly before we got started here, so I didn't have time to finish this. So I need access to the user group, the security group that the user is in. So my requirements necessitate that I have access to the name of the security group. Maybe I have specific display conditions, or maybe I have specific security that I want to eliminate access to a subgroup of my records depending on which security group and department they're in or something. I can do that. If I'm on premise, meaning I'm not hosted, I can create a new external connection that points right back at your same database, and I'll show you this in a minute. I can then create a database server object with the view as described right here. And then, and you'll notice that it joins user info with the security groups, and so it's going to pull in all of that information. And then I create a new external lookup to that view. And then on my user info, I'm going to create a new security group field. I'm going to create a relationship that binds user info back to this view that I created. And then I'm going to create a calculation that automatically keeps it updated. So what does this look like? The first step is the external connection. I am creating a loopback connection. And what that means is that I am allowing Cherwell to look back and see itself. So I go through and I create all the same SQL Server connection, and then I give it my database name, my server credentials, and once I go through here, I can test to make sure it was successful. Okay, so now I've gone ahead and created that, and I've published and created my external connection. The next step that I do is I want to create a database server object. When I'm creating database server objects, I can create a number of different things, and these are on the SQL Server. So in this case, I'm creating a view called View Security Group. It's a type of a view, and then I have my SQL to create the object, and that's create view, my name, and then all that SQL that I gave you that puts it all together. And then it automatically puts in here the drop for that as well.
Hey,
So
Kim,
now
someone's wondering if we're hosted, can we create our own SQL view?
I'm going to get there in just a second.
Perfect.
I started off with the non-hosted version. I'll get to the what happens if you're hosted in a moment. So now that I've done that, we're going to come over here and we're going to look at, I created a new, when I was up here on my lookup, I created a new externally linked business object, and to view security group. And I'll walk through that process. I'm obviously not going to create it because it'll give me two of them. But if I go through here, first of all, I want to decide whether or not to import to link to data. I want to link to data. I don't want to import it because I don't want it to live here. I want it to live where it belongs.
Hey, Kim, will you pause for a moment? Someone says she cannot see the windows on the left. I'm wondering if it's an issue with her particular browser, or can anybody see the windows on the left? I'm not sure. That's the comment, is we can't see the windows on the left.
Are you seeing the loop back here, Laura?
I believe I can see your full screen. Okay, she can see it now. We're good?
Okay,
go on. Thanks, everybody, for verifying that the rest of you can see it.
So here we have our external connection, that loopback that I created. And then I choose what I want to link. So that was my view that I created. So I'm going to go ahead and select my view. And then I get to choose what type of object it's going to be. It's going to be a lookup. And now when I get to here, the map fields to map, I specify map all fields. And now it's going to go ahead and automatically build each one of those fields that were in that view and build a field for it on my table. And then here I get to pick what field holds my unique ID and my last modified date and time if there is one here. And then I want to choose whether or not the data is read-only or whether or not the data is going to be updated. In this case, the data must be read-only, so I'm going to select that. And then I get to choose what to do for the full search. And I'm just going to go ahead and add in some fields here because I don't want SQL Server to do the full search. And then that's all there is to it. It won't create it because there was one there. Then I would have to go through and obviously create the form and create the grid for this in order to be able to use that. So what comes next is, and by the way, I had accidentally left it in, I was halfway through it. Normally, this is the way the user info is when you get into it. It's a lookup object. Cherwell has a thing called demoting and promoting objects. So what happens is I want to create a relationship. Well, you know, when it's a lookup object, I can't create relationships. But what I can do is I can promote it. So I'm going to promote it to a major business object, like I did here, and then click OK. And then I'm going to click the asterisk or the check mark to apply the changes. Then I can go to my relationships. And when I go to my relationships, you'll notice I have a relationship I was creating, user has security group. And if I edit that, I can then say it's a link, it's a one-to-one, and here's where it comes from. So it's user info has view security group, and then on my links page, I'm going to specify what actually creates my link between these two objects. And so once I've actually done that, I don't need this to be a major business object anymore. I can go ahead then and demote it back to a lookup. And so what happens here is this is the new field that I had created. And what I do is I do this, and I come in here and go for a calculated field. And then I can specify that I want that name from the security group from my view to be filled into this field all the time. So anytime that that field changes, I'm always going to keep up to date with whatever that happens to be. And then the last step is I just need to expose it onto I don't have to, but I can expose it onto my form. So just there, I can go ahead and add that onto the form. And then so when I'm looking at this, you're going to see security group up here on your user up on the upper left, and you're also going to see security group in this field. That, again, it's optional, but you can certainly add it, and it looks very nice. It looks like it belonged. And so what happens when I come in here and look at users? And again, this is the part that I said that wasn't working yet. Not sure why it's taking so long. So anyway, there, then like normally this would have admin in it. And yeah. So for whatever reason, that view just happens to not be updating at the moment yet. I have to figure out what's going on with that. It'll work for the next time. But so anyway, then that will keep that up to date. Going forward, I'm going to show what to do for non-hosted. For hosted versions, what you would do is, just like I created that view, well, you would actually create a validation table for your security groups. So I would create a list of my security groups that is separate from that list of where those security groups live, because I don't have the ability to create that loopback connection, which is why I can't create the view. So my validation would just have like, well, my security groups are A, B, C, D, and E. And then I would create that security group field that I showed you. And then my validation that I create in step 1 would be what I am validating on. So in other words, I would have to manually update that security group twice. But once it's updated, I can still use it the same way as I could normally. The only difference is that it's a manual step instead of an automatic step. And I could have also done that manual step as well for a on-premise, but it's a lot nicer if it's automatic.
Okay, are you ready for a comment, Kim?
I am.
I said earlier you selected view versus update. If update were selected, is this a way to modify trebuchet auth info for user info business object?
It is. You should not, and no. This is some very specific information coming from, and you could get yourself into a lot of trouble. It is not something I would recommend. Definitely to stay away from. I would never update any trebuchet table except the way Cherwell expects it. And so Cherwell is the manager of all the trebuchet tables, so therefore Cherwell needs to manage its own tables.
Great.
Okay. So the next thing is I want to control my display of record data based on information that's in my user's record. So my business case is that I need access to some of the information that is in my current user record or my current customer record too. It could be either one. But I need access to that information when I'm actually looking at incident, because maybe I have some fields that if there's a flag on the customer or user record, that they can see or not see certain information based on that flag. Well, I can also, I may also need access to that user information to administer security controls. And a third thing is that access to some of the user information is available through the user and customer expressions, but those are not always available, and they cannot be used on the left-hand side of a query in security expressions. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if I'm looking here at my business object, I'll look at change. And so when I go here and I look at this list, the only things you'll see that appear in this list are your 1-to-1s. And you'll notice that this last one here for user info is not what you think it is. It's actually the user who's assigned to that change. So it's not the current user, it's the user who's assigned. So I want to have access to the current user, the person who's actually logged on. So what I have done, we'll go back here to the PowerPoint here for a second. The first thing I do is I create a relationship. And the incident links to the current user. And I could do this on any of my business objects. I could do this on change, and I could also do this to customer too. So it's not, it's a very flexible solution, and it can, be for a lot of different things. So incident links to current user. It's a link, and it's one, and so it's incident links to user info. And then on the second tab, it is a custom relationship where the user info rec ID is equal to the current user rec ID, which is a system function. And so that is going to then build that relationship to my current user. Once I've built that, now I'm back here on the security that I was just showing you for change. And when I built that relationship as a one-to-one, that relationship becomes available just like an extension of the ticket information. So now if we look down here at the bottom, here's my user info, and it says user info links to current user. And so I can now use any of the fields that have been defined on my user info record and then compare it to something that's in the ticket, or compare it to some other expression, or whatever I'd like. And so that's really it for that. And I can go ahead and show you incident. So again, here is that relationship that was built, and then see I have access to any of those fields. And by the way, while I'm here, this is not something that I would do in this particular case. It's something I want to show you for the expressions. I talked about the user expressions. So if I actually go in here and I create a new expression, my editor, I also have a user customer data. And in my user customer data, I can pull data from the user, I can pull data from the customer, or I can pull data from who is the current user or customer. Some of this data is not always available. However, there's a couple key pieces that are always available, and they are really handy. For example, full name, email address, and the manager ID. So for example, if I'm looking at, Joan, and I want her manager's ID, I can pull both her manager ID and her manager's name by using these expressions. I can also pull her email address. So if I put in, if I'm filling something out and I want to get her email address from her ID, I can just say, go and build an expression and give me the email address for the current user customer that's logged on. So these can be very, very handy. Any questions on that, Laura?
I don't have any questions on it. I did get a comment that someone thinks that's really cool, so that's great.
Excellent.
Oh, one question just popped up. How do I add to that list?
You don't. Those expressions on that I was just showing you you don't. So that's something that is built from Cherwell, and that list is maintained by Cherwell. So anything that you would want to extend beyond that, I would use my method. I can give you a couple explicit business cases for like being able to link to the current user. Let's say I have the current user has some access to specific screens on an incident, or maybe that person can do escalations. And I don't want to create a new business or a new security group every time I have these little micro changes in my security. So everybody has the same security group, and I have options that are then defined inside their user record. And then what happens is then will go ahead and I will check their user info record to see if, oops, my screen flipped on me, I'm sorry. Oh, that's because I was on, I thought I was on the other thing. I will go check to see if that checkbox has been selected. So maybe language locale. I want English, or US rather. So if the language locale is US, then I'm going to do one thing, or I'm going to show them something that I wouldn't show on anybody else, like maybe zip code. Just there's lots of different reasons for that. All right, so let me go back, and now this is another kind of sort of similar iteration to what we just talked about. And by the way, Laura, you're going to have to be my timekeeper, because I know that I told you I had lots of content, and I'm not sure how much time that we have. But I just, well, I've been answering lots of questions too.
Yes, so we're an hour and a half in, but we do have 70% of our attendees still here. So I think it's great content. Let's keep going. For those of you that have to drop, feel free to do so. We will be recording this, so you're always welcome to look at the remainder of the presentation when you have additional time. But let's go ahead and keep going. I'd like to answer everyone's questions and get through the content.
And also, it is important to note that anything we do not cover today, we will have more of these presentations. We definitely have more content, and there was some content that we didn't get into this presentation. So certainly we are going to be available and provide this on an ongoing basis. And so the next thing is, this is a slightly different iteration of what I had done with the user table, is I need access to a single value from a lookup table. So for example, maybe I have the public ID for my operations team and I need access to the rec ID. I'm on a dashboard, so I'm unable to get auto-populate that to a different field. And I said, help me. And so there is a solution. I can create a metric. And so my metric can actually use like a value that I prompt for. So, oops, sorry. Here I have my metric for my team ID, and on my query is saying where the team info name is equal to a name that I have just prompted for. So this over here on the right is a prompt, or this could be a field that is specified somewhere on a table, or this could be, you know, whatever it happens to be, as long as I have access to one of the pieces of information. So I specify that field here, and then on my value, I specify the first occurrence of the field that I'm looking for. So let me go ahead and show you this. So here I have my team ID from team info. You notice I say it's a query value. And then in my criteria, I specify the name is equal to my filter team, and my filter team happens to be, in this case, a stored value. This could have been a prompt. This was coming from a dashboard, this example. And so then on my value, I specify that I want the first rec ID. Well, there is only one rec ID. So there is only going to be one. But there you have your options of first or last. And so I want the first rec ID, the first instance of that field. And so then what that's going to do is that's going to return the 42 character identifier for whatever team that I have specified in my stored value. That's how simple it is. And then this is another little cute little did you know. You can access some automatically captured information on your records. A lot of people ask this question all the time. Is the most common request is to assess whether a record has attachments. And you can do this by navigating to the automatic section of your incident. So if I go to all my little folders and I scroll down and I look for the automatic one and I open up that folder, there's a automatic field or a dynamic field called attachment count. There's a field called has attachments, and there's also fields for is modified and is new. Those are the ones that are used quite a bit. These fields, however, are not searchable. They may only be accessed, on a displayed record. So how do I now I want to be able to search for those attachments. So how do I do that? Does Cherwell provide a method for me to access that data outside of a record? And I said the automated fields are only half of the solution. You can't search on those automated fields because they're just there. I mean, they are calculated at the time when the record is displayed. However, there is a way to get at them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make the number searchable. I'm first going to create my own field called number of linked attachments. And then I set the calculation on the number of linked attachments to use the automatic attachment count. Every time the record is saved, hold on a second, on the calculation. Okay, I'm sorry. When I calculate, if something has changed, it'll make the form dirty or whatever, but I'll still want to save the record. So it says the record must be saved when adding an attachment to properly update our field to make it searchable. And so what this will do is it'll allow you to search on your tickets that have attachments. So if I've added 5 attachments this update and I save the ticket and I've calculated that I've added 5 attachments, that number of attachments is going to go from 5 to 10 or from whatever it was to plus 5. And so it's always going to keep that number of linked attachments updated. So then when I go and search, I'm not searching on that automatic value, but I'm searching on my clone of that automatic value that is actually keeping the information in the ticket for me. The next thing is this is a really cool little thing. This is a tip that we use all the time. Frequently, as a consultant, I always have a need to move major business object data with the blueprint. And I said some tables such as customers, service catalog templates, and work units, those are both a major business object, but they also hold lookup data. And so there's a way to move that data. So the first thing I've done is I've created a new table called underscore move business object data. I know that you saw me earlier create an underscore specifics. Underscore I know is going to occur at the top of the list, which is why I actually create it with an underscore so that I always know that it's going to show up right on top. And I said you can really name it anything you want, but the underscore makes it show up first in the list. Secondly, you create fields in this table for each of your major business objects, like customer, service catalog templates, work units, anything you want. And then you validate each of those fields from their internal Cherwell location, like service catalog templates. And then I create a blank form and I put that statement on the form that it's intentionally left blank. Now I can move data with that table. I open my blueprint, I go in and I edit the field for the type of data I want to move. I go to the validation tab, click edit data, add any of my items in, include, and then save my blueprint and publish. The one thing I did say is that if you actually do ever create this table, make sure you remember to move the table from development to production, because you think you only need to move the data, but then like when you refresh your production system over top of your dev system, that table will go away and you'll have to create it again. So let me go in and show you what I mean by that. Under my lookup tables, you'll see I have move Cherwell data. And you'll notice here that it just has, things that like are either major business objects or, for example, one of them, no, it's not in here. Like you might have there's a join table for between service catalog work units and the tasks. So, you might want to bring those in or something, or service catalog templates and work units. So you might want to also have that join table here as well. So for example, if I edit customers and I go to the validation, I now, because I validated here, I have an edit button here. So even though it's major business object data, I can go in and say, oh, sorry, that one's a group object. It does not support group objects. I added that one yesterday. Let me go in and look at, so service, for example, if you're moving your service category and subcategory, of course I can move subcategory because it's lookup data, but my services and my categories, I can't. I'd have to recreate them or find another way of moving them. So I can edit the table data, and then here's my service names, my own by teams. I can right click on a single one and say include, or I could right click or select all of them. When I select all of them, I either want to select the first one or the last one. If I select in the middle, all of my changes, all of my highlights go away. But if I select on the top or the bottom one, then I have the ability to include. I could even delete data going forward into production. And then once I say include, the next time I update it with this blueprint into production, it's going to add or replace all of my services into my next environment. And so then if I go and do that again, I can go to one of my other things like service catalog templates, which is one of the reasons why this was created in the first place, is because service catalog templates, you want to test with them. You don't want to create those directly in production. So I want to create them here, validate them, and then after I'm done, move them. So this gives me that opportunity to do that. I validated it all, it's all good, and now I'm preparing to move it forward in the next environment. So how do I know what's in my blueprint? This is like an added trick because that one's not in my presentation. If you go to File and Blueprint Changes, this will bring up a list of everything that is currently in my blueprint. And if you look under Service, it says Business Object Data. And then if I open that up, it actually says service data, 0 rows will be added, 11 rows will be updated, and 0 rows will be deleted. And so then it actually does the same thing for the service catalog template. Now keep in mind that those statistics are based off of your current system. So obviously it's looking at the system that I'm working with currently. If I opened up this blueprint in my destination system, those statistics would be according to what my destination system's statistics would be. So that's like a little extra added trick there. So now I want to restore my production database, but it's too big. It keeps growing. Maybe I've been using Cherwell for 6 years now, and my database has grown substantially. Well, as your database grows, your ability and time to restore may substantially take longer. So instead of it taking 2 minutes to create a database, it now takes hours and hours and hours. And also, some organizations have concerns about sharing data. So let's look at some alternatives. On the database tab, you go into the administrator and click on database on the left, and then you say export entire system, but then in the content you say export structure and lookup table data only. So then what that's going to do is it's going to export a copy of your database with all of your lookup table, plus it's going to have like, your structure for incidents, your structure for all your other tables, but all that data is going to be empty. Then there's a couple different things you can do. You can use the export to use that handy little, or you can use a blueprint with that handy little move table thing that we did earlier. Or, for example, like with customers, since it's a group object data, you can actually also externally export a single business object here and say, I want to export customers. And so it's going to create a CSV with customers. When I go to import that into that stripped down system, it is just going to have the customer data, and it's already going to know where all the fields are because all the names are the same. And so it's a very, very easy import. It's not something you have to sit there and spend hours trying to match up all the fields and stuff. And then you just import that database you selected in step 1. You import the extra major business object data that is both major business object data and lookup data. And then you'll have a clean database without ticket data. It's that easy. So the next thing is I want to add, oh yes.
Sorry, I didn't unmute in time. I do have a couple quick questions before we move on. One is, how efficient or quick is this versus using SQL?
Well, SQL, if you have SQL, SQL is always an option. And SQL is a very good option for you because SQL will take a copy of everything. When you export a database with Cherwell, you create a ZAR file, Cherwell does drop some of the attachment data, even though you may say to export the attachments, some of the data sometimes gets like stripped out of there, or some of the links get broken. Those can be fixed. So, I mean, no worries if you've actually done that and you've broken those links. Those links can be fixed, but that's something that happens when you export through Cherwell. When you do a database update, you get everything. So, I mean, like if you're going to clone the database, that's the easiest and fastest way to go. Not everyone has that option. And I mean, especially like if you're hosted, obviously you don't have that option. And I don't know if you know this, but if you are hosted, you can still take a database backup and export data directly to your local system through your hosted setup.
Okay, great. And the other person who asked the question said that he needed to leave. So he said, feel free to move on.
Okay. So the next thing is I need to add email attachments to my email. And I said I need to add the customer's attachments to my email. And I said my customers are maybe required to complete a form when they're submitting their ticket. When I send the email, I have to attach those forms as well to the first email that goes out. Well, in my email, I can select the little attachment button here on the email. And from there, that brings up this define rules for attachments. I can specify all attachments, or it can specify a first, a last, and then I click the include attachments. I can specify what kind of attachments, and then I click OK. And when I send this email out, it's going to send the email out with the attachments as well. That's that easy. And that looks like we're done. He was pretty close to the end there.
Okay, great. So at this point, we will leave the lines open for about 2 more minutes to give you a chance to ask any additional questions you have. So if you have any burning questions, now is definitely the time to get those in before we drop our conference call. I would like to thank you all for joining us as well.
While you're waiting, I would ask everyone, if you have questions or you have other things that you might like to see on a future call, please send those to us, and we'll be happy to talk about those maybe on a future call.
That's a great point. If you have ideas of things you'd like to see on future webinars, we're always looking for content we can share. Feel free to email us those or pop them into the questions or chat pane before you leave too.
And if we ever run short on content, we can always take some of your tips and tricks too.
Yes, exactly. Well, I'm not seeing anything. Let's leave the line open for about 1 more minute. Now is the time to ask any final questions before we hang up. Okay, we do have one comment. I'm curious to know how others have used knowledge articles. Do you want to comment on how some of your clients have used those, Kim?
Well, users use knowledge articles in a variety of ways. Some of my customers have it like as a distribution platform for like articles and documents that they provide to the customers. So it's not really a search and solve a problem, but it's more of a distribution mechanism. So like I can go out and browse documents under certain categories and get those documents back. Not very many of my customers have been using it in terms of incident management. Most are using it more as like a distribution or an idea platform where they can actually go and get documents or review data.
Okay, the follow-on comment I have. Yeah, a following comment I have to that is the person who asked the question said, I've added a button to show a tab with related knowledge articles on the incident form, and the knowledge article pane just never seems to work right.
That may be, I would have to, I'm not sure about that particular item. I would have to actually see the issue to see what's missing from the configuration.
Okay. Well, maybe that's something we can follow up with offline.
Sure.
Okay. Very good.
Was this helpful?
I've got a lot of comments. Thank you. Great presentation. I'm getting a lot of positive comments, so thank you for those. It looks like great feedback.
Great.
And with that, I don't see any other questions, so we're going to go ahead and close out the webinar. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Keep an eye out for future webinars. We've got a series of them we're going to do throughout from now until the end of the year, so I hope you'll join us on future events. Reach out to us at any time if we can ever be of service to you with Cherwell Professional Services. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.